Vamos a continuar.
Let us now continue. We have to keep with our time limit because we have a tight program, a tight schedule we must keep. You know how important it is to we've heard about that, of looking after the nutritional status and nutrition in GSD patients and in the hepatic GSDs, as well as all the different types of GSD, and particularly in type 3, which is what we're going to look at now. We know that the nutrition avoids the hypoglycemias or the poor muscle tone. So in the next lecture, we're going to listen to these nutritional indications for GSD type 3. This is Dr. Almudena Montalvo from the European University of Madrid. And you have the floor, Dr. Montalvo. Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me here, and I'd like to thank those of you who are here, the research group from the European University, and Pablo Olavide from Seville for having invited me 3 years ago to work on this condition and to start to work with you and to learn from you and to become a better professional. We're going to refer to the nutritional indications and guidelines. Alfredo spoke about exercise and the research we did together with exercise and everything that we were doing and still do every day, the exercise tests and all. But at the end, we have to refer to nutrition. So we have guidelines. And so, of course, exercise is enough, but it wasn't enough. So the nutrition should be added. Your condition and GSDs in particular are a metabolic. Certainly they're a dysomatic problem. They are a challenge, in other words. There's a high risk of having low blood sugars and hypoglycemias. This often happens in the GSD3, and it's because of low blood sugar and when they are babies or young children. And there is muscle damage, and they don't have the fuel for their muscles, the energy to be able to perform exercise. If you have low blood sugar or you suffer from low blood sugar, you have minimal levels, 0.05 grams per liter. This must be avoided, and we have these measurements. You're more aware of your values of low blood sugar, and between 0.6 and 1.2 should be the optimal range. Every time we do the determinations at the university, you say, well, we try for it to be between 0.9, around 1. Many of you tell us, you say, well, even in the morning when they go to school, it's not the same from Monday to Friday than the weekend. Their brain, their body, this activity they do at school is highly demanding, so the glycemia levels will not be the same. They don't need the same food. They have physical education. The weekend they don't, or a weekend, for example, when they're more tranquil at home. We need to try to maintain these levels, that they be as consistent as possible, and that there be no peaks. And so we need to try to prevent the activation of mechanisms such as neoglucogenesis. It is important that we know what is the baseline metabolic rate. How many calories does your body need to live? We have different formulae. It's the fact that this is just an estimation. In the future, one of the things I should like to propose to Alejandro and Alfredo would be to have an estimation of the basal metabolic rate before the stress test, to have more information and to be able to help in order to know how much I should eat or when I should eat and how much I should eat. There are different formulae depending upon if they are younger or older children and the like. And this, it tells us how many calories our body needs to live. And so if I were lying down, we only speak about what I use up. Then we have to multiply this by a physical activity factor. If I am sedentary, I shall multiply this by 1.2. And if I'm standing up or sitting down or working, well, then I'll need to multiply that by 1.2. So if I'm slightly active, 1.375, and then in GSDs, generally speaking, we multiply that by 1.375. So maybe, we're seeing that the days when we practice a sport, do exercise, and follow the recommendations that we have given you to try to do exercise every single day, or there are even some of you who do physical exercise for the morning and in the afternoon, a strengthening regime or a bicycle. You need to multiply that, and that particular day the calories eaten should be higher. It is very important that we know the percentage. And what do we see from 0 to 3 years of age when children are babies? Their percentage of proteins is much lower, between 10 to 15%. And we see that carbohydrates are 55 to 58%, and fat will be 30 to 35%. And when these children grow between 3 and 10 years of age, the percentage of protein increases 15 to 20%. Lipids, 30 to 35%. 10 to 18, our body doesn't grow so much. It does not need. Our growth will decrease. So protein will increase. And we see there is a decrease progressively as the years go by, our carbohydrate intake. So our nutrition will be 40-50% carbohydrates when we're 10 to 18. When we are adults, we see that proteins should be about 30%. Our fatty or lipid percentage throughout our lifetime should be about 35%. In adults, we could add a little bit. And carbohydrates, when we're adults, this is what goes down. It decreases. So it's very important. We don't need to follow the same nutritional guidelines when we are in development stages compared to when we become adults. It is very important to speak about the protein strategy. We need to consume every day between 3 to 5 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. And children, almost all, achieved these ranges between 3 and 5. And in adults, we noticed that they did not follow these percentages to have the correct amount of proteins. The distribution in each one of these meals, there should always be protein and between 20 to 40 grams per meal. What is the aim? To activate gluconeogenesis from glucogenic amino acids. And many of you use protein supplements. Something that I have tried and I'm trying to convey to the patients is that we try also to increase the proteins that come from food. It gives us other micronutrients, and if they are animal or plant proteins, not just supplementation. When we mix all of this with our cornstarch or our glyphosate, this is what is going to help us. But we need to see that people should eat real food, in other words. The proteins which we indicate, not just any old protein supplement. We need to look at the labels very well. Almost all of you, almost 95%, use a medical protein, so we trust this. We have protein with animal origin and plant origin. Animal origin, well, they have complete amino acids that will be a better quality, but there are more studies which indicate that proteins with an animal origin or the plant origin are just as good, or a good combination means that we can have plant origin diets. If you are vegans or vegans, then we have other complements. And here, the plant and animal origin protein is always highly important. So luckily enough, we have cold cuts, and we find more cold cuts that have more protein, 95% animal origin. Always look at the labels. Please do this to verify the amount of carbohydrates these cold cuts have. And people use ham, chorizo, pepperoni, and things like that. This should be remembered. And now, how does one obtain 20 to 25 grams of proteins every day? Well, medical protein, a scoop will give you these 25 grams. If you drink soy milk, also, and look at the added sugar. Be careful. If I have a can and a half of tuna, if I have 130, 150 grams of fish, or lean meat, if I eat raw vegetables, well, there are certain protein sources that we should be aware of, because what about the lentils? They've got too many, 100 grams. We can't just eat that because it's got too many carbohydrates. And, well, cottage cheese, for example, skyr, kefir, here lactose is going to give us carbohydrates. So look at the labels and see how you will combine these foods so glycemia does not go up after eating them. And something else in your everyday lives, and we heard this yesterday, that one of the gene therapies that is decreasing the need to take cornstarch. It is a key carbohydrate. You are going to combine this and take this. You'll always be doing it. This is a food which it's used after between 10, 12 months. And this always gives glucose, slow administration. And this should be given after the main meals. I'd say about 20 to 30 minutes after the meal to potentiate its effect. And this can be mixed with that protein scoop, and so that there not be any problems with the low blood sugar, and to have a longer release. What protocol should we follow? More or less 15 to 20 minutes after the 5 main meals, it is very important to see how we prepare this. We should always weigh this on the scales. It's true we have a scoop, but often I might put a little too much or not too much in the scoop, and this might change. We should always use cold water or room temperature, water from room temperature. This should never be taken with hot water or a hot plant drink. And when with a newborn baby, we have the diagnosis at this age group. They will be with a nasogastric catheter, and we will have the maintained glycemia, and then the levels of slow absorption glucose, and we have 10, 12 months. Then we begin with cornstarch, and it helps with the digestion, and it helps progressively. And some patients need continuous enteral nutrition. Well, it can be a nasogastric feeding tube, and these children are gastrostomy. And so they have nighttime enteral nutrition so that they don't have nighttime low blood sugars and everything be well controlled. When they get a bit older, with glycoside, or with this later supper, they're awakened, shall we say, at 1 in the morning to so they can have something so they don't need enteral nutrition and with this enteral feeding. And so this depends on the indication. During the first year of life, what do we do with our nighttime strategy? Well, we use our milk, which is enriched with malt dextrin, and then we will give cornstarch or modified cornstarch. It's glycoside, and this will be progressively substituted by this maltodextrin, which they will take when they're children, and we will combine this with proteins. And if our child, and we wake him up at 1 and he takes this little milkshake and goes back to sleep and there's no problem, then we can do this several times during the night so there can be a slower fasting period. And if not, then this continuous enteral nutrition, we wouldn't have the nighttime low blood sugars when they have this feeding. I'm a bit heavy going, and I say it's fine to have protein and carbohydrates, but certainly we need fruits and vegetables, and the combination of fruits and vegetables, of this fiber which these foods give us, so our glycemia will be improved, and our microbiota will be much better off. And there are more and more studies every day speaking about the importance of microbiota for carbohydrates. We have some limitations as well. Peas and corn. We have sweet potatoes, beets, potatoes, carrots, tomatoes, and fruits and vegetables and green vegetables. Well, we have to have a good, it should be al dente. It shouldn't be overcooked. Just between raw and before it becomes overcooked. That's just the right moment to take it off the flame. So fruit, I don't know how much fruit. Well, I have a limitation that I could only have these fruits. And how much fruit may I eat? Here, this gives us 5 grams of carbohydrates. Okay, we can have 25 grams, two strawberries. We can have cranberries, just a little handful. Well, they're all raw, of course. All these fruits have antioxidants, and they will help us. We have some limited fruits: banana, kiwi, pineapple, melon, watermelon, mango. But my son just loves watermelon and melon in the summer. Well, okay, they can just have a small little slice. These foods are very rich in fructose, and the portion that we are going to be able to eat is highly limited. We have certain sugars that are absolutely prohibited: lactose, pure sugar, saccharose, and sorbitol. And we shall always try to use complex carbohydrates, such as what we shall see shortly. And I keep repeating this. It's important to read the label. It's highly important. Here you have a chart. This just gives information. To have 10 grams of carbohydrates, how much should I eat? Okay, here's the chart. So if it's raw or cooked, and why it is important. Something in their meetings with the university, we heard that pasta, it should be al dente and just barely cooked. Later we shall hear about starch, resistant starch, and we shall try to explain why it is better that it be al dente. This chart is important, and it's informative. If I want 10 grams of carbohydrates, how many sweet potatoes should I eat? How many lentils? How many chickpeas or garbanzo beans? To have 25 grams of protein with the garbanzo beans, I need 100 grams of dry garbanzos, but I can only take 15 to 16 grams. Well, then the combinations sometimes are not complicated, but you have to play with this. But I know that children are doing this very well, and I think that little by little the adults, with these recommendations and lectures, will improve their dietary pattern. Something else, starch. Well, in the nutritional guidelines, when I was reviewing all of the information about GSD3, no, they didn't speak about starch. This is a strategy to create resistant starch or to eat food with resistant starch. This is an important strategy. In the end, starch is a change of glucose, and they have key components, amylose and amylopectin. In the human body, well, D-glucose will be absorbed in the small intestine, and this will be our main source of energy. The digestion speed of this starch will influence the glycemic response, the postprandial one, and of course this is a critical factor, and we have to control this response. But we can, and when we, in the cooking process, this is why we always try to be, the pasta be al dente when we cook with water and heat. These carbohydrates, this starch, the almidon change, the starch chains begin to be, change their structures, and they will open, they become softer, and this means that this facilitates our digestive enzymes, which means that our glycemic index goes up, increases. Digestion of these carbohydrates is faster, and this reaches, more glucose reaches our blood cascade. So this heat application should be as slow as possible. The gelatinization will be lower, and the digestion will be slowed down. What can we do if, besides we cook our pasta al dente? We have opened these change. We've opened these change. We don't want them to open so much, but we have a strategy: retrogradation. When we cook the food, and we cook it from 10 to 12 hours, and then we put it in our fridge for 0 to 5 degrees, the amylose chain will become reorganized, and it forms a structure which is much more compact. The starch will be type 3 resistant starch. And so when the next day we have that potato that we cooked the previous day and it got cold, or this rice, or even can we heat it up a bit in the pan or in the microwave? We don't need to eat it cold, but this structure which we have created when it was heated, it didn't break. So now in the small intestine, the absorption of the starch in the small intestine will not occur now, and it will act as dietetic fiber. That's a good strategy. What are the benefits that we can have with a resistant starch? What will we achieve? And the most interesting thing for this condition or pathology is postprandial glycemic modulation. Will it attenuate the glucose peaks and insulin, serial insulin? Of course, this is postprandially. And then we have a production of AGCC. This AGCC will improve insulin sensitivities and hepatic gluconeogenesis. And so we need to add this in our kitchen. We cook, then we cold, and then we can eat it the next day. Some people say, well, I freeze bread. Well, that's a good structure. And so I do rice, and I save it for several days. So you can make your rice the day before, or pasta the previous day. And besides, as we said, we're noticing how important it is to consider the microbiota and to use probiotics where they have resistant, type 3 resistant starch. So we have trophic and motor modulators effects here, and this helps with our digestive homeostasis. And this, we hear this with children. It's difficult that they eat this, and they don't feel any satiety. During the meal time, we sit down at the table during lunch or dinner. It would be important to eat in a certain order. The first thing we do should be eat our vegetables. That will stabilize glucose. It will create satiety, and it'll, as I say, stabilize our glucose. Then, secondly, we have the protein, and lastly, we have the carbohydrates to minimize the impact. And condimentation, no prohibition here. You can eat any spice you wish. It won't do anything with our nutritional things, but some have our antioxidants. We have turmeric and different spices that help. We have the herbs and spices and all, and we have vitamin supplementation, vitamin D. That's always good. The other day we were speaking about the recommendation in Spain is to reach a minimum of 30. Little by little, the guidelines refer to try to reach 50. Supplementation is recommended throughout the entire year, and it will be essential to maintain bone health and the immune function. And lastly, in the article by Schroeder et al. In 2022, when our patients have severe cardiac damage, we have this nutritional strategy will be highly important because we want to try to reduce the deposits in their heart and muscles and to maintain glycemia at stable levels to enhance this gluconeogenesis. The indication in this type of patient will be to lower the carbohydrate level, not reduce them, but don't remove them, but just reduce those deposits. So there be more. The diet will be higher in proteins and higher in lipids. So if we use a diet throughout our entire life that we mentioned before, we will not have this cardiac damage at all. If we do not do this, yes, then we might have this, and this might that it change over. It will not be possible. There's evidence to show that there is a reversibility, that to follow a diet we've been mentioning will improve your skeletal muscular function, and important and essential to be able to change over this heart disease, that it's very important to continue with your physical exercise. And I don't know if there's anything else or any questions here, but thank you very much. And I hope you have enjoyed this lecture. Do we have questions?
Hola, buenos días. En cuanto al orden de...
Hello, the order of the food. So that when would you have fruit? After carbohydrates? If you're going to have fruit, the fruit will be considered a carbohydrate. So in lunch, if I'm going to give them fruit and a little bit of bread or pasta or rice, it would be at the end then, after having the fiber and the protein. Thank you. I'd like to ask you about the microbiota. What can we do in these cases? And then the diet that we follow to improve our microbiota. In the end, well, we are seeing with the microbiota, one of the problems which occurs is that many sweeteners will affect this microbiota. So try to limit your sweeteners. If you eat a lot of food that we need to have something high in protein, many of these have sweeteners so that they taste good. So make sure that they be as natural as possible, that they be variable, that we have a variety in all of the fiber that we shall eat, and then try to do this in a regular fashion. But fiber with resistant starch, and it works well in the microbiota, it works very well, and in the GI tract improves also.
Thank you. 2 comments. Our experience is that you can introduce cornstarch slowly from the age of 6 months on. Just start slowly, and then they usually tolerate it.
This is the recommendation of the French guide. I haven't experience with children from 0 to 1 years old. You have much more experience than me, and I have made that recommendation because of the guide that are publicated. I want to publicate a new guide with your collaboration and with the recommendation that they have to use, but I have not the experience that you have. So.
Thank you. Really good. And we also think that you don't need the maltodextrin or something like that until that age. It even might give you more problems with high insulin and everything like that. So we just feed them every 3 hours, something like that, before we can start introducing the cornstarch. And if their protein, especially prealbumin, is low, already at that age some protein. And most of them stabilize with that.
Thanks for your...
Another very important comment, lactose is strongly recommended. You need the milk products, cheese and all the stuff. Only half of this will be transformed into glucose, and the lactose first will go, the galactose first will go to the liver. So, because many of these people live also of milk, it's different to the type 1, but all the ketotic ones are welcome to use milk.
It's something that I have read in some of the guides. They say that lactose is not recommended, and I put it here because it's the science that say that they, but if you see, I have talked about cheese, cottage, skyr, so I think that they can take it, and it's a very good protein, and it's also, we have talked, after the exercise, take a yogurt, because you have protein, you have carbohydrates, so it's like, I want to write something about that, and with your help, of course, because I think that there's many information that is not right in science right now, and they need your experience with all your patients. So.
The problem is that I, for example, do very little research. It is just from experience, and the old guidelines, I would call them old, they are severely outdated. Outdated, David, what would you say, especially about the diet? Sometimes they are even dangerous.
I would agree that the maltodextrin is problematic because it increases the insulin, as you said. I would love the idea of everybody working together to come up with the new guidelines.
We want to do that, and it's because of that they talk to us to please do this conference, give us the information, and the next thing we want to do is to write a new guide with the new information. And we know that not only experience, but it's science and experience.
Hay una última pregunta.
Hola.
I would like to ask about potassium, because in the labs are low. So you mentioned that one should restrict the eating tomatoes, bananas. Is there an alternative with regards to foods to remedy this? It's complicated. Some patients tell us the same thing. They have low potassium, and in the end they use a complement, with a nutritional complement, with a pill to increase that potassium, with calcium, and sometimes with magnesium. In your case, the nutritional level is more complicated to achieve this. It will be more difficult. I could try to look for more foods. We don't know about all of them, but we should look for other potassium-rich foods. Now I have something new to do. If you give me your email, I'll look for it, and I'll try to answer your question. Well, thank you ever so much. Thank Dr. Almudena Montalvo.
Bueno, ya está preparado.
And now, Dr. Ulrike Steuerwald is all ready. This is a cornerstone in our research and in multidisciplinary treatment of GSD. She has great clinical experience. This is a very broad concept, and here we shall try to fit this in with the next lecture. Besides theory, clinical experience, this entails medical practice, diagnostic evaluation, procedures, results, and interaction with the patient. And so now Dr. Ulrike Steuerwald is going to speak about this. She comes from the National Hospital of the Faroe Islands. You have the floor.
Okay, while trying to get things ready, I can start by saying thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me back here. Thank you to Alfredo, Alejandro, or Almudena for their very nice talks, because that gave me, it's a lot of the stuff that I'm supposed to talk about. Here. And one more comment. I have an agreement with my patients that I'm allowed to use their pictures, but that these pictures are never to end up in the internet. So what I will do is that I let the team know when one of my pictures is coming, pictures with the patients, and then they just focus to me. You can see the pictures, but not in their film. Otherwise I would have to get all the pictures out, and that would be very sad for you. Okay, you already see that, so it's just my opinion, or my experience, what I'm talking about here. Then very quickly, you already heard about that type 3A, what is wrong. If we would have more time, I would ask the parents or the kids, because most of them you already know. All the carbohydrates that we eat will, in the intestine or in the body, be transformed into glucose. This glucose goes through something else, and then it will be stored as glycogen. Where? Where do you store that? Igalgo, yeah. And some other places we not talked about yet. Then, if your blood sugar is going down, you somewhere need the sugar from, because you cannot always sit in the kitchen and eat and eat and eat. That's when you start to break down the glucose. Oops, where's that? Here. Where you start to break down the glucose, and the liver can set the glucose, the sugar free, and that will get your blood sugar up. Okay. Then in type 3, the first part, oops, I will get it. So the first part works as usual, but then you can't break down the glycogen, so you start to store the glycogen in the liver, in the muscles, and in other places. And your blood sugar will not go up. It's very simplified, but that's how it is. If the blood sugar falls low in GSD, your body says, hey, the brain, who mostly relies on sugar, has to get sugar somewhere. So what does the body do? It takes two things at the same time. It takes protein that is mostly stored in the muscle, or the small protein, the prealbumin that we can measure in blood. It will transform part of this protein to something that's called pyruvate, and it at the same time, it always will do both, will go to your fat reserves, take the fat through free fatty acids. A very small amount of this also will go to the stuff that's called glucose 6-phosphate, and that can get your blood sugar up. At the same time, the fatty acids and a little bit of the protein are sent to the liver, and you'll create ketones. That's where your ketones come from. Or said in the other way around, if you see ketones in the blood, it is a sign that you had to use protein to stabilize the blood sugar. So ketones, for me, is usually an alarm sign. I was low. I had to go for the protein in my muscles. So if you only go for the glucose, you might miss the periods below glucose, because the body is able to get the glucose up again, but from the protein. So you have to you have to measure the glucose, you have to measure the ketones, and if they are abnormal, you know, oh God, I lived on my muscles. And that's something we want to avoid. Okay, we can find the periods with the low glucose either by the finger stick and the ketones, or with the continuous glucose monitoring. Here's the picture of a child that had, during the night time, long periods with low sugars. We had to give this child more of the cornstarch. Okay, that worked. So the next period, the night was free of low blood sugars, but we still had this. And you see the upper limit is 180. we actually use a much more narrow range of normal blood sugars. We try to keep the blood sugars between maybe 75. Some children or some people already start with a blood sugar of 75 to go for their proteins and do ketones. And it should not be much higher than, let's say, 100, 110 after a meal. So if you put a line inside here to see, that would have been the optimal blood sugar during the day. And that's where this child was. What happens with this sugar above the line? Who knows? You are free to answer in Spanish. What happens with the sugar that's above the line? Yeah, high blood sugar, but where does that blood sugar go? Yeah, precis. Okay, when the blood sugar is high, especially above already 100, there is someone who starts to work. That's a very special guy, insulin. This road sweeper, his task is to get the sugar out of the vessels. High blood sugar is dangerous for the vessels. So it takes the sugar into the liver, the muscles mostly, so the sugar can be stored as glycogen. And you know, stored glycogen in GSD is not great. But by this, the blood sugar gets down, because otherwise you will get a lot of trouble. And in the fat cells, if the liver and the muscles are full, the sugar is brought to the fat cells and transformed into fat. There's something else. If you have insulin in your blood, you don't have access to the fat. This man, Mr. Insulin, tells the fat cells, stop, here is more than enough sugar. You are not allowed to go to your storages. You are not allowed to use the fat. So, for example, if you want to do exercise and you want to have access to the fat that helps you to get a lot of energy out of the food, the insulin man should be at home. He should not be available. Otherwise, no access to the fat. Here we have a young man who had been treated in another place, and that was when the parents contacted me. And you see why we are so critical about maltodextrin. That's the high blood sugars they get, and that's how he looked like. Okay, what did we in cooperation with David? We put him on cornstarch and protein. That's what he looked like very soon after that time. And now he is living on very little of cornstarch. It's just because he doesn't like breakfast, glyphosate, and protein. And he is a very successful goalkeeper. Oh, sorry, I forgot about the pictures. Sorry, okay. Not this one. He's the goalkeeper of his team in the southern island of the Faroes, very successful. And since he started to take even more protein, he is able to do the warm-up of the whole team that he could not manage before. So also his endurance increased a lot. Okay. Oops. And you know where the glycogen is stored, in the liver, in the muscles, unfortunately also in the nerves, in the brain. Everyone knows now how glycogen looks like. This is a very special thing. And each of these little stars is glucose. And up to 10,000 glucose you can store in one glycogen. And what Alfredo already said, glycogen is so nice to store your sugar. You have a lot of sugar you can use if you have glycogen. How can you use this glycogen? You have to break it down, cut it off with a blue scissor. And then you come to a point where it goes around the corner. That's where you need another scissor, the deep brancher, and it's the deep brancher that does not work in the type 3. So the type 3 people have access to all these sugars. It's a little bit simplified, but they can get quite a number of sugar until the stops. And so when they start to exercise, they have access to some sugar. So that's for the first few minutes where they can exercise. And then, nothing. That's why we say you have to take a drink before you start, because it takes you something like, in the beginning, 15 minutes, even 20 minutes, until you get your fat from the fatty cells into the muscle cells. If you exercise, that's much faster. That's what you also can see, that the metabolism of fat gets much easier for these people. Okay, so that's the normal glycogen that these people can't break down. Then you get something that Alejandro already showed you, this limidextrin that is not supposed to be in the cell. The cell does not know, what should I do with this strange thing? I can't break it down. So what does the limidextrin, the partially broken down glycogen, what happens to that? It is packed into something that we call the phagosome, autophagosome, small bags. So it does not disturb the function in the cells. And then later it might come into here, but the capacity of the lysosomes that might break it down is limited. So if you eat too much glycogen, you get more and more of the limidextrin that has to be stored in these phagosomes, in these small pockets in your cells, and this really will interrupt the normal function. So that's what you can see here. It's only the pictures of the mice, muscle cells of a normal mice. Very nice, homogeneous pink color. What you see here, the white stuff, these are these packages of limidextrin that later on are transformed in fat. So you end up with fat drops in your cells that disturb all the function. Unfortunately, not only in the cells, also in between the cells. These are muscle cells that are supposed, or it should be in this direction, muscle cells. That's how it's supposed to look like. Look at this. Here you have the fat in between, and then the muscle cells can't work. They become stiff, painful, because the fat is not only in the cells, but also everywhere around. So that becomes more and more if you do not limit your glycogen, if you do not limit your high sugars. Many people manage that during several years, and then you have a point of a threshold, a point where the muscles can't manage that any longer, when these lipid drops are too much, and then you'll feel that. And the muscles get destroyed. If you wait too long, in the end, you won't find muscle cells, just fibrosis and fat. How can you know whether your muscles are okay? What most people do during controls is to measure their CPK or CK. And we usually say, if the numbers are too high, that usually tells you there has been muscle damage. The CPK, the CK, creatinine kinase, is an enzyme, something that is inside the muscle cell. If the muscle cell is damaged, it gets holes, and this enzyme, creatinine kinase, you can find in the blood. So that tells you something went wrong with my muscles. That also happens in healthy people. If you have someone who runs a marathon, this person will have a CPK of something like 10 or 15,000 for the next 10, 15 days before that goes down. So that is actually something normal, but if the CK always is high, the question is, what is wrong with the muscles? So, what's about a low, too low, or low normal CPK, or one that is going down? Does this always say, oh, this person is healthy? Unfortunately, no. Then I look at the creatinine. If I have a normal functioning kidney and I look at the creatinine, then I can take the creatinine as something that tells me about the amount of muscles that I have. High creatinine, normal high creatinine means usually lots of muscle. Creatinine going down tells me, oh, less muscle mass. And less muscle mass, on the other side, will give less CK. One example, two sips from the Faroes. You see the stuff that we measured, the total protein that we usually measure. We didn't have it in this patient, the albumin and the normal range. The pre-albumin we didn't have in this man at that time. The creatinine, the CK, the blood sugar, the mean blood sugar, and some more thing about this man. So it's about that man. And I better do it like this. So the first numbers are from November 2009. This man had some problems. Oops. He drank alcohol. Alcohol is not good for the liver, not good for the muscles. He was a smoker. He was overweight, as you can see. Overweight is because he ate too much sugar, and he had already developed type 2 diabetes. Urea is a substitute for the intake of protein. If you eat a lot of protein, your urea is, the carbamide urea, BUN, is going up. So after he talked to us for the first time, you see his protein intake went up. We didn't have the total protein, unfortunately. We didn't have the pre-albumin at that time. His muscle, his CK went up because he became a little bit more active, and at that time, for the first time, measured the mean blood sugar, all too high. He did not drink any longer, but his weight was high. He had osteoporosis, and he had severe vitamin D deficiency. So we started to intensify everything. Some of the stuff became better, blood sugar went down, but I think it was already too late. You can see CK going down, but here in June 2015, his carbamide, the CK went really low, and his carbamide, his creatinine went low too. At that time, he couldn't rise out of his bed, and it was not long before he died. It does not have to be like this. There's another pic, or there are more pictures. Look at that. That's the same mutation. But active people, this lady now turns, she just turned yesterday, on the 3rd of October, is her birthday. She is now 73. She's walking something like 5 kilometers a day. She's able to walk up hills without anything. She started, or she never got a real intervention, but we told her to eat some more protein. The other is also a man who is living in Greenland. That's why I don't have very much contact to him, but it's all the same mutation. And even he is the teacher, so he had to walk to his school in the morning, something like 20-25 minutes. He was always too late, so he had to hurry up. He's a vegetarian, but he got good proteins from his food. And also he had normal CKs, normal liver function tests, normal, no limitations. We didn't do the intense tests that you do with rising up and testing all that, but his daily life was not impaired. Okay, how can I find out whether I did too much or whether my muscles are breaking down? That's first by measuring the CK, but that's unpracticable. You cannot go to your physician and say, please take my blood sample, let me know. So what most of the young people in the Faroes who have GSD3A, what they do, they measure the myoglobin in the urine. Oof, sounds very complicated. It is not. I think some of you might have seen something like that. The sticks that you use to figure out whether you have an infection in your urine. On these sticks, you can buy them either in the internet or in the pharmacy. These sticks help us quite a lot. Myoglobin, the red color in the muscle, that you also will find in the blood if your muscle cells got damaged. It cross-reacts with hemoglobin, the red color from the red blood cells. So, in women who just have their cycle, it's a little bit complicated, but otherwise, if you have a healthy person who reacts with the hemoglobin erythrocyte area, then it mostly is myoglobin. And that's something you just can do at home. So people who do not know, did I do too much? Did I exercise? Did I overdo my exercise yesterday? They just stick their urine and they know, okay. And then very often they come to a point where they can feel, here I have to stop. Now it is too much. If I really did harm to my muscle, can I undo this? Yes, gratefully. Okay, camera off. Esther. A lady who knew David for many years, type 3A, she did not take her diet really well, and she had problems taking the right diet because she lives in the UK. So when she was 32 years old, her muscles were in a state that she could not walk, that she could not stand up, that she could not even comb her hairs. So she just lay in the bed. She managed to find some people to flow her over to Hartford. Was it Gainesville? Yeah, okay. To get treatment. And the treatment was cut the carbohydrates, give her very little bit of cornstarch and protein, protein, protein. You can see, that's May 2013. Look at that lady 2 years later. She lost her weight and she... Yeah. And that's one of the recent pictures. So she is still sticking to the diet and is doing really well. She has a tube, as you can see, because she has some more problems. She doesn't tolerate milk and some other things, so she has to take some of the stuff through the tube. But it is possible to go back. Okay, some more pictures that I already showed our specialists from the university. 3 of the Faroes ladies participated in a study in Holland, in the Netherlands, where they wanted to figure out what they can do for the muscles. You see an MRI picturing the muscles. I have to go here, up here. Here you can see little muscle left. This is the bone inside. Muscle tissue, fat. That was a man, 36 years old, not very active because he had problems from his muscles. His exercise capacity was 34, 1/3 of the predicted exercise capacity he should have. Another one who looks okay, but did not very well. One who took honey, sugar before exercise and in between. He was in a very poor shape. And then you have 3 of them. Their max workload was above the stuff that they were supposed to do if you compare them with women of the same age. The 3 Faroes women. Okay, you have the BMI and the age that they were older actually as the other ones. They were had more or less the same weight, but they clearly did much better. Okay, what is different in these ladies? Their carbohydrate intake is not that much different, but they ate, because they did not have access to simple sugars, they ate complex carbohydrates. They did not excrete very much of the glucose tetrasaccharides that will say you if you are going to store glycogen. And the most important thing, look at the protein. The other 3 ones were as an average of 20%, and they are well above that. So it's really the protein that made the difference. And it is not that they were on protein powder all their life. They have the big advantage of living in the Faroes, where they live off fish, dried sheep, whale meat. That will say protein, 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 all their life. Okay, I perhaps was a little bit lazy, or I just thought those young kids from the Faroes who are doing so well, who are exercising quite a lot, and all have normal CKs, they know best what they should do. They got education about their disorder since they were very young. So I just took a presentation of one of my nice patients that she gave last year in Duderstadt in Germany, and she called it Exercising with 3A. Okay, now we have to take it off because now there are again some pictures. The little fat one, that is Birgit in a very young age. And that's her cousin who is exactly the same age. And you see, she looks like most of the kids when they are diagnosed, or many of them look like. Later on, just the same. At that time, she had severe issues with her heart. So we were very lucky that David took her under his hand. She went over to see David to get treated, and that's what she looked like later on. Low carbs, high protein. Then, and exercising quite a lot. Then, when she did her final exams in school, she did not find the time, or she did not think it was so important, so she did not look very much at her diet and did no sports. She didn't feel very well at that time. So she thought, okay, back to the old one. And it worked. At that time, she participated in a short marathon, 5 kilometers, that she finalized in between the very good people. So she started, and she now tells us how she did. She is doing quite well now. Okay. That's her recipe, what to do. Start slowly. The people who are sitting here, I can take all the pictures out and can share this presentation, so you don't have to take pictures here from, you don't have to remember everything. She called it the snail method. Start slowly, exactly as you did during the exercise study. Very short distances, at a slow pace, with light weights, low intensity, many breaks. That's how it worked for them. Nobody ever recommended it for them. That's what they found out from what we tried to tell them how they should do it. Preparing for the exercise. What should you do? In the Faroes, you always have to look at the weather. If it is very cold, why do we have to look at the weather? If it is cold and stormy, you need more energy. Okay, so you have to calculate that. If it is very hot, you need some extra fluid. And then some cornstarch, some protein. That differs a little bit between the people. Then this young lady, she takes a little bit of fast sugar to cover the first 10 minutes. She does some warming up, and she always has her phone and extra snack with her. And she told me, you have to listen to your body. You have to stop or to slow down if your muscles tell you, now it's getting hard. And even if you slow down, your muscles still hurt, stop. She usually does the most intensive part in the beginning and then something slower later on. Very important after the exercise. Why is it important to do something when you finished exercise? Even a 3A is able to use some of the glycogen in the muscle. And the muscle says, my storages are low, I need some more sugar for my muscles. And where does the muscle take the sugar from? From the blood. And usually you don't have any sugar left in the blood because you have used it while running. So we did, gratefully, not in the Faroes, but in other studies, we had people who became unconscious, who just fell down after the exercise 10, 15 minutes later, because their blood sugars were so low. So, first, you need some carbohydrates, after the exercise. And if you want to do something even better, take some protein. Because during the first, let's say, 60 minutes after exercise, you have a very good circulation, blood circulation in your muscles. So if you want to build up more muscles and get some protein in your blood, it will go to the muscles. And it will help to keep the blood sugar up. Okay, some stretching, and very important, about 6 hours later. You don't have to get up during the night to do that, so you just stick the first during the next day. And if your muscles age, the next day you know that was too much. Which sport? We always discuss that with David, because these young kids said, I want to go to the gym, I want muscles like my friend. And he said, no, weightlifting. And they said, yes, weightlifting, we will do that. And they did it. Okay, but usually we say something that you can manage. Rowing machine, you know what that is? It uses a lot of energy, so it's very hard. Step trainer, treadmill, even more. That's what Birgit goes for, what she really manages. And sprinting, it's not ideal, but they do it. And you can't forbid it to them. If they control it well, it is fine. Okay, pictures. Kjartan, 24 years with his little daughter. He opted to tell us how he does, make sure to eat well, also during the days before. You exercise, he goes to school at university, so he can't exercise every day, just to fill up your stores. He can do everything. Lifting, weights, running, no limitations, normal CK. The bike at high speed, and I'm quite sure that's more than 30 minutes he's doing. What does he do? Protein shake before exercise, and that's how his shake looks like. So you see, the banana for the fast carbs. Usually they don't take the very ripe bananas, but the less ripe. Peanut butter, oats, frozen fruits, usually berries, that we say stuffed with low, simple sugars and mixed with milk. Works perfect for him. Another one who is really very good at doing sports, Kjartan. Fit man, huh? He really is a very nice man. Do you see his muscles? Weightlifting. He has some weights down in the cellar, so he goes down into the cellar each day. Normal CK, normal urine sticks. 5 hours a week, work out. Eats well every day, lot of protein. A big meal between 5 and 6 o'clock, something like 1 hour before he starts exercising. He trains for 1.5 to 2 hours, might take a snack, something like that in between, and eat straight afterwards. And then once again before he goes to bed. He needs these calories because he is so active. His body mass index is perfect. So, that's him. And another lady, the sister of the man I showed you in earlier, Ranwa, she started getting treatment or education about her disorder when she was something at 35 years old. She's able to climb the hill behind her house that must be something like 800 meters, and she starts really from sea level. She needs some help for that, but she comes up here. And that is at the age of 53. These are GSD3A patients, confirmed. And if they don't take their starch, if they don't follow the rules, they get the CK of up to 10,000. Kjartan, for example, he once forgot about his cornstarch in school when they went out to do something. He had a CK of 10,000 the next day. So that is real. Okay, Ranva prefers to swim. She eats before and afterwards, and she knows exactly if she does not do that, she feels very poor. So exercise for all of them, those who exercise are doing well. Actually, you already taught us that If you exercise, you teach your body to use the fat and to have faster access to the fat. And you can save the sugar for the brain. The blood sugar level is much more stable, less risk for overweight, less risk for type 2 diabetes, and that's what we see now in the adults, those who are 45, 50 years. Most of them are on their way to get type 2 diabetes, not good for their muscles. 3 things that might harm your muscle: hypoglycemia, too low blood sugar, because then instead of building up your muscles, you use your muscles to stabilize the blood sugar. What can you do? Take cornstarch and protein as prescribed. Hyperglycemia is an enemy of your muscles. And that's something we have realized only during the very recent years. And the problem is worse in those who are getting a little bit older. Everyone who went through puberty, these are the people where you have to start to reduce the carbohydrates. Overdoing the exercise is not good for anyone, even not for these people. Okay, take home message: take the prescribed amount of cornstarch. Cover your extra demands like sport, hot, cold temperature, disease. 1 degree above 38 degrees of fever makes 10% more need of energy. Get enough protein, and that is really much what they need. Sometimes while they are growing, it's even more than this 4 grams per kilo per day. Limit the intake of carbohydrates, especially of the simple sugars. Check to know whether you get too much carbohydrates. Check your blood sugar about 1 hour after a meal. And if you are still higher than 110, you know that was too much. Have a look at your food, why it is so high. There, I should talk to you for another 2 hours to figure that out. Okay, very important for the parents, and teach that to your physicians. Everyone who went through puberty has to go back with a cornstarch dose. Something that I fully agree with you, regular exercise is part of the treatment of 3A people. It is important, in my eyes, as important as the diet. Should be part of their regular day. How do you best? Perhaps with the snail method and the snacks before and after the exercise. Off again. My expert team in the Faroes are these people. I think you won't be able to figure out who of these are. GSD patients, okay, here you can see with the weight, and okay, she's a little bit short. Yeah, that's the lady who now turns 70 or just turned 73 years, looking fine. But with the other ones, you won't be able to distinguish between SIPs or family or I don't know what. They are just, like gratefully most of the patients here, they are looking healthy. And these are those who really give me a lot of information. Also the families here. So I really have to say thank you to my teachers, to the experts, to the families here in the Faroes and in Germany. That's it.
¿Preguntas? Sí.
You told us that after training is very important, the snacks, and to the families last day. And I want to know how much protein, how much carbohydrates, the proportion, if they do strength training, 45 minutes of aerobic training, what is the proportion that, because we say to them, take protein, take cornstarch, but they need to know how much they have to take.
The thumb rule that we start with, it will be a little bit lower for very young kids, but for those who are 8, 10 years old, 10 grams cornstarch plus 5 grams protein before exercise. You might have to adjust that, and they usually go with that for 40-45 minutes if it is not too intense. Otherwise, you have to start what we talked about after 40-45 minutes. Either take another small dose or to sip some, might be maltodextrin. And afterwards, it's the other way around, 5 gram carbohydrates, 10 grams proteins. I always prefer natural sources. That will say most of them just might take a small snack of 5 gram carbohydrates, and if they don't have too far to go home for their dinner or something like that and really get a good dinner there, that's okay, because the protein has to be consumed optimally during the first hour after ending sport.
And a second question is how much protein they have to take with the glyphosate during night? How much?
Very good, very good. When do people grow? All day? Night. The first part of the night, when you are going to bed, or not we, I don't grow any longer, but if the young people go to bed, it's usually mostly during the first 2, maybe 3 hours. So give them a good amount of protein at that time. And then maybe some more if they need a second dose of cornstarch later on, some more protein, and otherwise divide it during the day. And it depends on how much natural protein they can consume during the daytime to get the amount they need. If you just can take that off once again. Okay, I think I'm no longer on, so I can do it like this. Okay, so I have to do it like here. This young lady, she was diagnosed when she was something like 1 year old. And she, at the moment, gets more than 5 grams per day just to grow and to have a normal protein. You have the catch-up growth, and it depends how well or when you started the protein supplements. And then usually after puberty, it's usually down to between 3 and 4 grams.
But there's no proportion of protein and cornstarch that they should take after. There's no proportion to say 1.3 or 1.5. There's no proportion. It's like you give more protein with the cornstarch if they don't take that protein with the meals, no?
Once again,
if they take at dinner 20 grams of protein, 25 grams of protein, when they take the cornstarch after that dinner, they don't need to put much protein.
No, but I like better to have the cornstarch and the protein in a scheme and then to check their blood samples. We usually, in the older ones, we do it once, maybe twice a year. In these young girls, we do it every 3 months because she's growing that much to figure out. But we keep the cornstarch and the protein scheme stable because that would be too complicated for the family. And if the total protein that I did not see in any of the labs here, or in very few, the total protein tells me, does this person get enough protein into him or herself during the day? If that is okay, I know the amount of protein is fine. And the pre-albumin you can use to figure out how many of the low blood sugars you had in between, because you take this pre-albumin to get the blood sugar up again.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Buenos días. En primer lugar, agradecer.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Ulrike, Dr. Ulrike, for your presence at our meetings. Thank you very much. I have a question related to nutrition. When we talk about fruits, even if they're red berries with not a high glycemic index, if we replace wholemeal bread. Hello? 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 Yes, we are translating. No, we are translating. The device is off.
Can you hear?
El dispositivo está mal. Sí que estamos traduciendo. Se habrá apagado.
Testing, can you hear the... It's okay.
Okay, hello? Thank you. Yes. I repeat then.
Go ahead.
Vale. Sí, pues...
Okay, fruit. Even it is not a high index fruit like red berries, if we replace wholemeal bread at lunchtime, and if we replace that with the fruit, even if they are red berries, we see that glycemia is not so stable as when they take the wholemeal bread. So, is it important to introduce fruit in diet, or is it better to stabilize the glycemic level using complex carbohydrates with whole wheat bread?
First, stabilize the blood sugar during the day should be done with the cornstarch. That gives you your basic needs. Then, for the meals, for the extra carbohydrates, I think it is best, might be a very good question to Magali, she knows even more about that than I. Usually it's the mixture. So berries I just would use for either for a snack or for dessert. But that doesn't sound to me like something that can give you enough carbohydrates, good carbohydrates, for one of the main meals. So, for example, if you use some oatmeal, uncooked oatmeal, together with the berries, and let's say some yogurt or what's that, skyr or quark, I forgot what that is, another stuff that is made from quark, okay, something like that, then I'm quite sure that will work. But only the berries, I'm afraid that will never work, for example, for lunch.
¿Más preguntas? Sí. Hola.
Hola.
Glycemia should never be above 105 or 110, right? After 2 hours postprandially, 2 hours after eating?
Only one.
We are very, very strict. I was much more liberal before. But after seeing what happens to those who store the sugar, what happens to them on the long term, I prefer being very strict. You only will see the long-term sequences at the age of 35, 40 years. So it's the same like it is with smoking. If you start to smoke today, okay, you might get some cough. But what it does to your lungs, you will first see in another 20 or 30 years. So think about especially your muscles already today. And you can achieve this lower blood sugars by learning more about the food you eat. We are thinking now in the Faroes much more about the concept of glycemic index. How fast do the carbohydrates that are in a food, how fast do they go into the blood? If you take, for example, carrots, cooked carrots, where you have broken down all the starch that is in the carrot, that goes here, and then insulin man is coming. I take this sugar, put it somewhere. If you have the raw carrots, you have to chew it, and it takes much more time to break the starch down, so you will have a very slow rise, and that's why I'm not afraid of people who just sit like a rabbit and eating their carrots. So you really have to try to figure out what is the food. Is it the brand of food? Is it the food itself? Or is it the amount of the food that gives you the high blood sugar?
Ok, lo que ocurre es que yo...
Okay, yes. But I think that in our case, if at 1 hour afterwards he's at 100 and he won't get any higher, I will try it out, okay? But I don't think he will last without eating anything for 3 or 4 hours more. He will have to eat something before that, probably.
Very strict. I allow something like 110. And then it is really the question of the composition of the food. If you have, for example, protein in your food, a lot of protein, a lot of vegetable, they won't get the blood sugar up. And that also will delay the absorption of the carbohydrates, and that will make you lasting much longer. Those who go straight for the carbohydrates in the food, if they come for a lunch or dinner, that is usually because their blood sugar was low before. So you might have to think about a snack in between or adaptation of the cornstarch doses in between. Make that sense?
Okay. Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
She said yes, thank you.
Hola, buenos días.
Hello. Good morning. If I understood, high urea is because they are taking too much protein in the diet. My son has too high urea levels in the lab work. And I don't know, did you say it was because of high protein in the diet?
And I want a high urea. High urea is fine in these persons. David looked at something like 160 or even more patients on a high protein diet that will say type 3, type 6, type 9, type 0. None of them got any issues from the kidneys. And that is, if we would, as healthy people, would eat that much protein, our kidneys would have problems. But these persons with the ketotic GSDs, they need the protein. So I really want to go either at the upper or above the upper limit of urea. So congratulation if the urea is above the limit. That's the goal.
Pues muchísimas gracias.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Steuerwald, Ulrike Steuerwald. Okay.
Yeah.
Justos de tiempo.
This is our last presentation this morning, and you know that interaction amongst the specialists in metabolic disease with sports and nutrition is absolutely essential. We've been seeing this all morning long. We're addressing this, the patient as a whole, and we've heard this morning how important training is and to follow up the diet and the nutrition in people with GSD. And now we're going to take a step further, and we shall underscore the importance of bringing these two spheres together in the life of any person, and most particularly in our case. This will be done, given by Dra Magali Reyes from the Children's Hospital, Federico Gómez in Mexico. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here in this lovely place. And I would like to say that all of this time we've been speaking about why exercise is important. And I'm delighted that at this conference particularly we're going to be able to exchange how important exercise is, not only in type 3 GSD, but in other types of GSDs. And we're going to say, why do we need good nutrition in GSD, in any of the types of it? Because this will help the patients have an optimal sports activity. And so we don't want to have unnecessary injuries. We want to enhance any type of recuperation. And we want to have a good nutritional state. What happens in glucogenosis or GSD? When I'm practicing a sport, I want to avoid any problems about which we heard so much this morning, and which has to do in metabolic control of patients. I don't want to have low blood sugar, and we have to have good muscle recuperation. And so we want to, as I say, we want to avoid this muscle damage. Following this way of thinking, this will depend on many things. It's as if this were a jigsaw puzzle, and it will depend on the type of exercise we've spoken about. Energy demands are different in each and every patient. And it is very difficult that we be able to give a specific formula because each patient responds differently. In my experience, I have seen brothers and sisters with the same genetic mutation, and the response is completely different to the treatment. It will depend also on the time and the duration of the physical activity, above all the intensity of this exercise. The treatment, the same as we've heard about in previous lectures, how many carbohydrates a patient can eat, cornstarch, for example. This is under discussion, and protein also, supplementation. But we use this in patients with GSD, and this part of their recuperation, and sleep also. And we need to have good sleep quality, good resting. This will enhance the results and also enhance the recuperation. We shall try to address the diet which one must follow if you're a GSD patient. Patients should always be well hydrated, and sometimes if a person doesn't get enough protein, we give them protein supplementation. Okay, what challenges do we have with a patient who wants to be an athlete? And this can happen to any person who wants to do exercise. We have to know what food or drinks are the best ones for that physical activity, and how can we prepare access to information which we have. Things are a bit confusing because in TikTok or any place we can see recommendations from nutritional coaches, and it's hard to get information that is applicable to our patients. We know that GSD experience is limited in some centers, but it's always important that we be able to work with a team to help these patients. On many occasions, and when we refer to mobility, when children go to school, it's hard that we be able to give them the necessary foods they need. And this happens to patients with GSD because they have to take their protein, their cornstarch, and this is a bit difficult to adjust the timetables. What happens? Due to recommendations from relatives, we can recommend supplements with no scientific evidence behind. It's complicated, and I've heard this a great deal. It's something that happens in Mexico, that as things are not, we don't have really proper guidelines, it's hard to show that things really work. And in GSD, we speak about individualized treatment, and it depends on the patient's response. Therefore, it's difficult that we be able to make a specific recommendation for everybody. Sometimes this can be a starting point to improve this situation. It's useless to train, to overtrain, shall we say, if you do not make an effort to eat, to have a suitable nutrition. And one should follow one's treatment well. We can add things for you to do a physical activity, but above all, you must remember that, as Ulrike said, I can have a good training scheme, but if I do not eat and I don't have a nourishing diet, everything is useless in the end. And we've heard this more scientifically about this energy use in exercise, and we know that exercise needs the ATP. It's a molecule which helps the cells to basically work correctly. I need to identify and to know when a patient with glucogenosis needs a specific amount of carbohydrates, which I should give him, and how I should give him this energy support so that the training be done in an optimum fashion and to get the best sports performance. We know that protein is found in a lot of places. Proteins are used to generate all of this energy. And when we do not eat and we don't have enough energy, we don't have enough protein, then the body begins to use these amino acids, these proteins, from wherever they can. Mainly they come from the muscle, glycogen, even other parts of the body, in order to be able to you need to give back what has been taken away. We see this, and we see that all of these actions should be more, everything should be done more immediately if we compare this to other athletes who are not GSD patients. And these systems that affect this glycogen storage disease, we need to give them adequate energy, protein, the muscle, without growing. It will be wasted because it's using these proteins as a fuel, because they're using because in the brain the neurotransmitters occur And this will explain why patients feel well when they perform a physical activity. But they do need enough protein, and if they don't, then this process will be more complicated, and there will not be the same effect. And then in the liver, it's the most important source of glucose and of protein. However, as we have already heard in this particular session, we cannot use it, or the GSD patients cannot use it, and this impediment which we have just hinders the fact that we can supplement adequately, because we do not know specifically what the needs are at the moment when these demands arise. We have already heard about the different types of GSDs, and this outline will just show you, and it helps us separate these cetotic GSDs with some within a liver or a muscle involvement, or just a liver involvement. It's important that we be able to supplement the amount of energy required, and specifically in the ketotic GSDs, we need to give extra protein, and this marks the difference between the fact that the patient would have a better response to training or not. So we do know that the lack of energy is not always obvious, and sometimes some of the patients here might have low blood sugar, and they might have any symptoms, and they might not even feel bad. But most of them have a continuous glucose measuring monitor, and this helps if this goes down. And with performing physical activity with the adrenaline that they have while they are moving, it is difficult that you feel that you need more energy. And so in the GSD, often we measure prior to exercise when these demands need to be covered. It's not always so easy to be up on this. And as I've been explaining, if one doesn't get enough protein or energy, that's when the body will begin to use the muscle as a source of energy. This happens mainly in the type 3 GSDs. In the type 1, we cannot use this mechanism, and it complicates the fact that we be able to have a suitable follow-up for their physical activity. And also, not only does it weaken us, but this affects this substantially. And what about the evolution of physical exercise in GSD? In most of the books that you will find, even in some of the guidelines which are still used in the old evidence, is that exercise in GSD was dangerous and needed to be avoided. This is why it's a pleasure for me to see groups and teams of professionals who are trying to get the patients to exercise and to show scientifically why it is important that they do exercise. And so inactivity in the enzyme can just harm the muscle even more so, and it can cause rhabdomyolysis, and that's a great fear treating these patients. That the patients with GSD can't do anything, he can't move about, he should just rest constantly. And there was nothing to do. Even though I wanted the patient to move, we couldn't do anything about that. So now what do we know today? We know that well-planned exercise is part of the treatment. So what do we have to do? We recommend moderate, regular exercise. It'll help the patients to have greater strength and to have a greater aerobic capacity. Being sedentary is not good. Patients might be weaker, or they might have metabolic or cardiac problems. But this, as I say, being sedentary just worsens this weakness and more heart metabolic risks. And nutrition prior to exercise is always going to improve this tolerance to exercise. And Ulrike's examples, in fact, some patients, when the exercise is very intense, they might use some type of fruit to help get this extra added energy. And scientific articles say that we can get a good response to rapid action glucose or carbohydrate, but that everything should be personalized or individualized for each patient. And what is very clear at this moment is that patients can perform exercise progressively and supervised. This is one of my patients in Mexico, and the fact that I would have never ever imagined that she could play rugby, with her, 90 was her glucose level. I'm a little more strict than Ulrike, and I always try to have the patients between 85 and 95 so that these decreases or these increases of glucose not be so strong and that they get a better response to the treatment. So here, before she goes to train, she has a snack, and the same as Almudena, I try to promote good fiber in the diet, enough carbohydrates for that physical exercise, and the necessary amount of protein. It might be type 1 GSD. I'm not going to say that we're going to give her high amounts of protein, but protein is always important in any person, and above all, in people who want to be athletes and practice a sport. So this, I'm trying to simplify. The amount of exercise and the intensity is associated to metabolism, carbohydrates, proteins, or fats. And depending upon the aim which we have set, then if we're speaking about a patient without GSD and the response we want to fasting exercise. What about this again with GSD? We have to see where their metabolism is and specifically identify the amount of proteins and carbohydrates which we need so that this energy or these sensors, these energy sensors, make all of this machinery function. That was explained so beautifully in the first session, and so that everything be able to work correctly, so that I be able to make the necessary changes for the resistance to training. And now, these are the calcium channels, but it's also in patients with GSD. I focus my attention from the nutritional point of view on the amount of protein and carbohydrates which that patient should receive in a given moment. Just as a reminder, you know better than I, the difference between simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. We know that the simple carbohydrates are those which have a quick action, rapid action. They will give us instantaneous energy. Glucose is used in many athletes because this gives an extra punch and oomph so that the person will finish the marathon, be able to reach the summit after climbing the mountain. And then we have the different, in the glucose, they can be compounds, they can be monosaccharides, saccharose, and lactose. And then, well, there can be milk or some type of rapid action. And then in this group of the simple carbohydrates, we can add fructose. This is found in all fruits. We know that green vegetables have a small amount of fructose, but they also have fiber, so it's more difficult that they have the effect that fruit has in the glucose peaks which the patients might have. And furthermore, we have complex carbohydrates, those where there's slow absorption. We find this in most of the foods which use any type in cereals or bread, pasta, potatoes. All of these foods are composed of starches depending upon the cooking, and there might be a specific amount of starch, and it will give a better response. And when we see the patient with a certain who's going to have a physical activity compared to the simple carbohydrates. And what do we have here? We know that glucose is an essential fuel for performance, and we know that cornstarch is very important. It's a chain of glucose which rake little by little, and they release energy as time goes by. So it's not something that's been written down specifically in any guidelines, but the specific recommendations speak about how to use cornstarch before exercise, as Ulrike was explaining, in combination with a certain type of protein. What will the intervention depend upon, or the amount of carbohydrates which I'm going to give to the patient? As we've already heard, the type of exercise, the time to practice that given exercise or sport, and the intensity of the same. So, if I have the kind of exercise, this chart comes from a publication to see how much the output was of different types. of metabolic diseases with in muscle involvement. We have GSD, the green line, and depending upon the type of disease, the output is different. But here on this chart, we can also see that depending upon the kind of activity, the output is much greater, and it is even different. And some exercise, which we would have never thought would be more demanding than others, this can be evidenced here. So here we're going to have to see this output, this exercise. It's very difficult to see this every day. This is why it's important that I have a good basis to begin this physical activity. People can begin 5-10 grams of cornstarch, depending upon how close or not the training or exercise will be. If it's very separated from eating this cornstarch, or if it's closer, shall we say, there's a longer difference. You're more expert than I in how to handle their timetables. It's very important that there should always be good metabolic control, so we need to avoid high glucose peaks. Sometimes it seemed it was better to be above or to maintain the high in fear of low blood sugar. But as parents, this is something that's you're always thinking about as parents. But we can take that curve lower down. It will help us with the amount of carbohydrates received prior to that exercise, or the food intake prior to exercise, if this is enough to cover the needs in that time limit or time lapse. So it's all depends on the time. We have some patients who have even participated in a marathon. Some, they love swimming, and they might have 1 hour or 2 hours of swimming with intervals and rests. For them, there are some activities which might cause a decrease in glucose in patients who are a bit more sedentary. I specifically in the type 1s, when they go out to take a walk, their glucose goes down. And so what we can recommend is that they eat a bit, or they identify an activity that has a greater impact on a decrease of that glucose. So we need to know about these glucose curves, our metabolic control, always keeping in mind an over-treatment or very high glucose level might complicate the response to the carbohydrates received. And at the same time, we might find ourselves in a Russian roulette, and we wouldn't know if it's due to exercise or because I'm not giving enough carbohydrates. And also there are some activities, and they're moderate or more intense. Bicycling, dancing, playing, swimming. And so we talk about a specific amount and an extra amount of carbohydrates or even of additional cornstarch. But, of course, you would know how your glucose works. And in other strengthening exercises will depend on the structure. And there are some activities which can help bone strengthening. And here, what we are applying with patients is between 45 and 60 minutes. This will cover the cornstarch meal during that time period. We always have to see the tolerance and the response that our patient will have. So here we have some symptoms which should be borne in mind when we speak about static, continuous symptoms and dynamic symptoms. This helps us. Am I achieving the needs of my patient? We have these continuous or static symptoms, might be weakness, atrophy, muscle weakness, and this is more frequent in the type 3 GSD. It might be slow, progressive course. Structural damage, this is identified from a study. The most important thing for us is that this significantly affects the quality of life of that person. Now, we have more dynamic symptoms: pain, fatigue, contractures. They might be caused or not by the exercise. That's why it's important, as Ulrike mentioned, to listen to our own bodies and to differentiate between these types of symptoms that might be dynamic Some of these symptoms might be remedied through rest, and sometimes that we have an acute muscle energy crisis, a sudden drop in energy, can't get out, can barely get out of bed, so forth. These are signs that we should bear in mind to realize that we are not supplementing that exercise adequately. Now, with regards to protein, we do know that protein not only is essential for growth in early stages and teenagers, mainly in children actually, but also it's going to help us to maintain and to repair the muscle. So GSD, due to the muscle damage that patient has, then we need to have high protein intake. And so this is where we use muscles to generate energy. The idea of the treatment and supplementation before exercise is to try to decrease this risk of muscle damage and to at least limit it as much as possible. This protein intake will help us so that the muscle isn't overworking, and so we don't want the person to be tired the whole time or it feels weaker. So we have to adapt the protein intake suitably. Exercise in general for type 1 GSDs we really haven't been told how much protein each person should have. So I would say an amount for a person who practices a sport might be between 1 to 2 grams of protein. It's not as if it were the base of the disease, but what has been written is that patients with the type 3s might have an intake between 3-4 grams per kilo, and the type 6 and 9 between 2 and 3 grams per kilo. This will depend on the follow-up that we do. And this is an example, because I talk about this with my colleagues, and if I want to reduce the protein intake of the supplement because maybe it's a bit too much, I want the person to eat a more proper meal and more varied meal, then we must always remember that the fact that I decrease and I change the 2 grams per kilo of protein just in the diet, it has a significant impact, one, on the gastric capacity for the patient to digest all of that, and there will be more calories received, there will be more saturated fats, and there are many foods which have a lower amount of saturated fats, and they might even have a lower amount of fat. Nevertheless, they might increase give more calories during that food intake. So my patient with type 3 GSD, 15 years old, who weighed 50 kilos, how could that person eat 200 grams of protein? So I thought, well, if he can eat it with the diet, the only thing that I achieved was that he gained 8 kilos in 3 months, and the CPK stayed high, remained high. My patient's response was, the amount of food is too much. I'm full all the time. I almost want to vomit. I don't want to even look at food. So we did a changeover to protein supplementation because at this moment the patient didn't want to use a supplement. So we changed him and everything went very well. I'm not going to say that he lost the 8 kilos he gained, but he did lose weight, and there was an improvement in biochemical control and above all in the cost of the diet. Sometimes it's easier here in Spain, but in Mexico, patients have to buy all of their supplements. Sometimes it's easier for the patient to have access to certain foods, but it is important that if we think and we want to give all the intake that the person needs through a diet, we must know that there are additional things that are going to be included in this modification. Let me give an example of a patient, a younger patient than my adolescent, 35 kilos with a type 3 GSD. He needed 140 grams of protein. That translated into 300 or 600 grams of fish. Maybe in a party or on a weekend it's easy, but to do this every single day is very complicated. Above all, if we think of a person who weighs 35 kilos, and the same with the type 6 GSD. We drastically reduce the amount of fiber because the volume that all of this meat will occupy is a great deal, and it complicates things even more. And then after a few years of experience, I prefer to use a supplement for the majority of the protein requirements. And this is because there are different they have different bioavailability and the biological value of the proteins. And not everything is absorbed the same. This is a debate which arises. When we have vegetarian diets, they need to mix, because they need to mix this with other types of foods to complete what we call aminograms, which is like the recipe for proteins. And if we don't make this combination, then you can't make the most of the plant protein 100%. But something that if we want to use a plant protein for more variability in the diet, we've already heard about carbohydrates that some of these pulses have. And so there's a greater contribution of carbohydrates. Then in the end, it's not going to be 100% absorbed. Leche whey. Here we speak about using foods that come from an animal source or a protein supplement, because there's good fixed availability to get better results in the end. Going back to all of this information, we know that the protein intake will depend upon the time, the type of exercise, and the intensity of that activity. This is a practical way to do things. I don't know how we can see our plate when you go to eat, or you're going to, the patients with GSD. I like to put things on a chart, because in GSD it's very difficult to give healthy advice about eating just fruits and vegetables and so forth. And it's difficult to follow our nutritional guidelines that we learned in the university. But it's important that we be able to use the greatest amount of vegetables we can and greens that we possibly can. Here, you know, if you have more starch, we want to limit that amount. And we want green leaf vegetables that come from different sources. This can help us increase our fiber amount, and we can avoid this glucose peak. And this is the type 1 GSD, and we see the carbohydrate is always a very small amount. And in the type 3, I would recommend that there be a smaller amount of carbohydrates depending upon the stage, the growth stage of that person. Always having more protein in the type 3, and also, which is normal in other types, so that when I look at my plate, it will be this distribution. And something that we often forget about is hydration. Hydration is super important, and it's not a problem. Here with you and your patients with GSD, however, we must realize that dehydration can increase the risk for fatigue and cramps. So you can see these data after physical activity, but sometimes it's difficult to know if it's due to extenuating activity, lack of adequate supplementation. So at least if we can cover the part of the hydration is of utmost importance. We know that it must be regular intake before, during, and after the physical activity. So you're not going to wait until after the physical exercise and drink a liter of water, because the effective hydration will not be what we're looking for.
Please take this into account. During physical activity, sweating, perspiring, you not only lose glucose and break down proteins, you also lose essential electrolytes, so that contractions take place properly. So you have to be very careful with proper replacement and hydration. Here is a chart that is easier to use for the patients. how well hydrated you are, whether you drink more or less water, depending on your situation. If I'm dehydrated, you have to drink a large bottle immediately, okay? Depending on your dehydration. On a regular basis, we usually don't assess the color of our urine. But when you're going to perform physical activity and training, you should monitor it. Now, additional supplementation. Well, as patients, you are very, very careful indeed when providing any kind of additional supplementation. But the message is that there is no magical pill. There is no silver bullet unless it is cornstarch and protein. Uncooked cornstarch, UCCS or proteins, and there are some indications that you may do something, but there is no supplementation that could replace a good basis of nutrition and diet and physical activity. And the take-home message: carbohydrates strategically before and after physical activity and adequate protein together with hydration. Any additional supplementation that you want to use needs consultation. Ask your nutritionist, your multidisciplinary team, depending on the type of exercise. And again and again and again, I repeated everything. Nutrition, rehydration, and muscular recovery are an essential part of your treatment and your quality of life, and you have to bear the positive fruit of all the exercise and what you're doing. And if you use any supplementation, should be well documented, controlled, and under clinical supervision so that it won't influence your metabolic control. And as we said during the session, exercise is a very positive modulator for childhood development. It helps for bone mineralization. It reduces the risk of bone fragility, improves motor function, and provides general well-being, which is the most important thing for us as caregivers and healthcare providers. You know that you have a general well-being. That's the most important thing. And it optimizes, as it was said before, metabolic control with adequate diet and adequate supplementation. Sometimes we only think, oh, well, like an appropriate supplementation before and after is enough. No, everything that happens in between and the rest of the day is also equally as important. And now I'd like to thank the Spanish Association of Glucogenosis, particularly Nerea. We met about 10 years ago. David Weinstein's program. It's wonderful to see how far they have reached and how the community is gaining strength and how the options for GSD are increasingly different. In the beginning, when I started with the program, I couldn't look for possibility to see so many healthy people at this meeting and all the changes and how you've grown. It's pleasure. It's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Tenemos unos minutos para alguna pregunta.
We have a few minutes for questions. Yes, please.
Hola.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Reyes. A question that's always been in the back of my mind. The gluten-free or low-gluten foods, are they to be recommended for group 3, type 3? Gluten-free or low-gluten food? Is it recommended for type 3? There is no evidence. As to the gluten content, no, we don't have evidence. What we verify is the amount of carbohydrates. I know that here in Spain, you have a higher incidence of celiac disease, and it could be beneficial, you know, because they can avoid the gastrointestinal disorders and discomfort, and some publications even point at an anti-inflammatory effect, but no, specifically talking about metabolic control and GSD and glycemic control? No, it doesn't make any difference whether you eat gluten-free or gluten content food. No, it doesn't make a difference. Yes, another question? Okay. Good morning. I would like to know exactly the amount of protein. My child is type 9, so I have to focus on type 3, not the 1. You said 2-3 grams per kilogram? That is total or supplement plus diet? I'm only giving 2 grams as supplement. So all in all, 60 grams a day, and he weighs 15 kilograms. So I don't know, am I overfeeding, or the maximum should be 45? Yeah, well, that depends very much in the response and the metabolic control, okay? What is discussed in guidelines for type 9 is from 2 to 3 grams, but he's doing well with 4 grams. Metabolic control, growth does well. You don't need to worry, you know. The important is the metabolic response and the control. Don't get into a rigid box and follow the guidelines like they was set in stone. The patients are the ones that determine the appropriate response. If they were not eating appropriately or suddenly it's very difficult for them to finish lunches instead of 2, you could go to 2.5 or 3 as far as he can eat, but always bearing in mind the metabolic control. That is what will guide you whether you are feeding excessively or not. Hello. There's 1,000 things in social networks that are advised by sports coach, nutritionists. They're talking about the omega-3, the capsules that are to be taken. Does it have a benefit? It helps with cholesterol and other things, but does it have a good benefit for us, or it's an irrelevant supplementation that food is enough? And I'm a very sports-like person, but does it provide a particular benefit, the omega-3 fatty acids? Well, in my experience, it has general benefits in the population at large, antioxidant benefits, and it may help. In some instances, it may help. As a healthy person, it can help you, you know, to improve your lipid profile. But in the case of patients with GSD, there's no direct effect. Your triglycerides and cholesterol are the result of the metabolic defect. If I administer you omega-3, probably what I will do is not very significant. It might help you, but not really. It won't be harmful, but it really doesn't make a difference if you don't have adequate metabolic control, and if you don't have well controlled and adjusted the uncooked cornstarch, okay? If there are lipid abnormalities, are at 100% because of the metabolic defect. So supplementations won't help you. Yeah, it does have an anti-inflammatory effect, not so well demonstrated scientifically. It may help you on a general basis. Well, it wouldn't be so relevant. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your presence here. We're talking about a supplementation that everybody talks about, creatine supplementation. Everybody is recommended to take creatine. It's quite the file lately. Does it have a benefit in our patients or in the general population to take the creatine pills? It's just publicity, a publicity stunt. Thank you very much. I didn't want to state creatine specifically when discussing supplementations. I discussed this with Ulrike, you know. They say that you can increase your muscular mass overnight and everything is wonderful and you recover immediately and whatnot. Well, one of her patients did take it. There was no change. And what we agreed upon, both of us, is that if they want to try, they want to take this supplementation, they need clinical supplementation. But creatine is not particularly harmful, not directly on metabolic control, but it does require control and supervision for renal metabolism, renal complications. But as long as the supplementation is well supervised and doesn't have an impact on metabolic control, try it out. But if you don't see a benefit or a change, stop doing it, you know. Don't take it any longer. They're taking a lot of things. Why take something additional that doesn't really make a difference, doesn't provide an important benefit? Ulrike, do you want to add to my answer as to creatine? Microphone, please. No, use the microphone. We cannot hear you.
Lo dejamos aquí.
Okay. Well, that would be it. Thank you very much, Dr. Magali Reyes. Before lunch, just a minute more, please.
Se dio un...
And this is a little attention to the speakers who have been with us in the first meeting of this conference. And today the organization would like to give a little attention, a little memory, shall we say, to the speakers who have been with us in the mornings. Some of us will be here this afternoon, but since we're all still here together, and maybe someone will not be able to stay for this afternoon, the organization wanted to give you a little something to remember this conference. And I think it would be nice to have a family photo up here. So if you could all come forward, the speakers, because this meeting is particularly intense, productive, and we appreciate all of you speakers who have been here with us. So if your speakers could please come forward to our family photograph. Please come forward, the speakers, all of the speakers, for the family photograph.
Dr. Weinstein, they were calling on all the speakers.
Ulrike, too. Yes. I don't know what.
Esa foto de familia ya también con el presidente de la asociación.
President of the association. I can't add anything more. And here we've had wonderful speakers here, and we would like to thank them for being here and for them to continue coming to these meetings. Nothing more? Thank you so much. At 4 o'clock we'll convene again. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias.